I'm back, guys. So sorry for that. Katong sa last video na to. Okay, I need to cut kay na error sa computation. Wala man gud ako siya gi-check ang sa libro. So mali man gud ang sa libro na ako gitan-aw. I just noticed it right now. So we'll proceed to operating income. Dito ta last nag-stop. So the budget amount of operating income is 250,000, and then we're going to compare it with the actual operating income of 345,000. So the difference is 95,000 pesos increase. So it's not 295,000. It's 95,000. So kindly correct lang. I just noticed it right now pag-explain nako. Ako rin siyang gidiretso mag-encode kay o kabantay nga sipyat ang nasa book. So anyway, as I said, there is an increase in 95,000 pesos, or that is equivalent to 95% increase, and that is favorable since operating income is a revenue item. And since the actual operating income is greater than the budget operating income, so that is favorable. So we'll now proceed to the average industry data as base. So, horizontal or comparative analysis, where the average industry data is used as the base, intends to determine the financial operating performance and condition of the business against the industry. So, the analyst seeks to answer this question: is the business on a par, above or below par with the industry in which it operates? So, this kind of horizontal analysis is very valuable, particularly for investors and creditors in their decision making. Kaya before they make any investments or before extending credit, the investors and the creditors usually compare the financial performance of the business against the average of the industry. And then the investors or the creditors most likely mag-invest sila or mag-extend sila credit to a business entity if the business entity's profitability is equal or above the industry average. So the industry average are aggregate data collected by researchers and government regulatory agencies. So the data is usually made available to interested users in the form of mga reports like business journals and other types of media. In this type of horizontal analysis, the base figure is the industry average. So if revenues and profit are higher than the industry average, the difference is favorable. And then if expenses and costs are higher than the industry average, the difference is unfavorable. So kaganina, what we are comparing is the actual performance against the budget data. Now, we're going to compare the actual performance against the average industry data. So, when it comes to revenues, kung mas dako ang actual revenue kaysa average industry data, that is favorable. But if baliktad, kung mas dako ang industry data sa revenue kaysa actual revenue, that is unfavorable. And then when it comes to expense, kung mas dako ang actual expense kaysa average industry data, that is unfavorable. But if mas dako ang expense sa average industry data kaysa actual, that is favorable. Okay, we're going to apply these things in our illustration later. The foremost limitation to this type of horizontal analysis is the non-availability of the information on the industry average, or in some instances, the late gathering of data. It's not data, it's data. Okay, but then actually there are some mga businesses, like for example kanang mga bangko, so they regularly submit financial information to government agencies as part of their reportorial requirements. So naagyoy data regarding average industry data para sa mga bank, since ang mga banks nag-submit na sila og mga reportorial requirements dito sa BSP. Okay, we have here some example. So we have here first the statement of financial position of Countrywide Bank. dated December 31, 2017. We also have Statement of Comprehensive Income for the year December 31, 2017. And then we also have the industry average data regarding banks gikan sa BSP for the year ending December 31, 2017. So take time to look at these figures. Okay, and then you have here the interest rates on income and expenses used by countrywide bank are equal to or the same as the industry average. Here's the requirements. We are asked to prepare a horizontal analysis on the following accounting elements of countrywide bank against the industry average data and indicate the variance as favorable or unfavorable. So we have assets, liabilities, and revenues. So let's answer first the assets. So we have here the comparative analysis for the assets of countrywide bank against the industry average. So as I said, our base here is the industry average. Okay. So for cash and cash equivalents, there is an increase of 2,500,000, which is equivalent to 5.0%. So how it is computed, first we're going to determine the absolute amount in peso, absolute amount of change in peso. So we're going to compare the actual against the industry data or industry average to get the absolute amount of peso. So like for example, we have actual amount of 52,500,000. Then we're going to compare it with the industry average data of 50 million. So there's a difference or absolute amount of difference in peso of 2,500,000, and it is equivalent to 5%. So 5% is computed by dividing the 2,500,000 by the base amount nga 50 million pesos, and then we get the 5%. Okay. So the effect of increase in cash and cash equivalents is favorable. For investment securities, there is a decrease in 185,000 pesos or equivalent to 7.5. That is unfavorable. Then for loans receivable net, so there's an increase in 7,500,000, which is equivalent to 8.8%. So that is favorable. Then for bank premises, we have 1,500,000 increase, and that is equivalent to 37.5% favorable. And then for real properties acquired, we have 7,500,000 pesos decrease or 25% decrease. That is favorable. We also have a sales contract receivable. There's a decrease of 1 million pesos or 33.3%. That is favorable. And we have other assets. There is an increase in 2 million pesos. That is equivalent to 200%, and that is favorable. Okay. If you look closely at the effects of the difference on the accounting values, you may spot some inconsistencies to the rule. Specifically kaning sa real properties acquired and sales contract receivable. Okay. They are assets actually, but then normally when we speak about assets, kung mudako ang actual assets compared to the base, like in this case the industry average, supposedly it's favorable. But here, if you notice, ang decrease sa assets nga real properties acquired and sales contract receivable, decrease ha. Supposedly it should be unfavorable, but here in this case it's favorable. So usually in other type of business, usually in other type of business, increase in actual assets is favorable. But then in the case of banks and other financial institution, it's completely a different thing. Okay, take note. Rural bank is a banking business that extends rural credit to small farmers and tenants. So it is basically a service entity. It does not therefore carry goods intended for sale, and the large portion of its assets are in the form of cash and cash equivalents and loans receivable since banks derive their income from interest income on loans. In the course of lending operation, borrowers sometimes could not pay their loans on maturity dates. And time will come that the bank is forced to take the collateral properties of the borrowers who failed to pay their obligation. And then the values of the properties acquired from foreclosures are entered into the accounting records of the business through the account title, real and other properties acquired, or ROPA. So, again, kaning ROPA nga account is i-lodge ni or i-record ni siya ni bank every time nga naay na foreclose nga property. Kay usually pag si borrower mag-loan na siya sa bank and then and then it take millions iyang loan, so na siya i-guarantee nga property. And in the event nga dili siya kabayad sa iyahang giutang sa bank, so ang bangko iyahan nang i-foreclose ng property. So meaning to say, kuhaon sa bangko ang property. That's why at that time record na siya og ROPA. So supposedly ROPA is an asset. Every time nga mo increase ang ROPA account, kay naay na foreclose or na transfer sa bangko during the year, mo increase ang ROPA. The ROPA account is mo increase siya every time nga si bangko makakuha og real properties. Maka-foreclose siya og property. And then mo decrease siya kung naay property nga iyang previously na foreclose pero iyahang nabaligya na. So we have here, increase in ROPA is not favorable. The increase implies more borrowers fail to pay their accounts on maturity dates. So as I said, ROPA account is an asset, but its increase is not favorable. Kaya ang increase of ROPA means that more borrowers failed to pay their accounts on maturity dates. So therefore, decrease in ROPA accounts of banks is favorable since this will indicate that only few borrowers defaulted on their borrowings. Okay, so kung na-increase in ROPA, that is unfavorable because it's a sign nga daghan sa borrowers ni bank ang wala kabayad sa ilang obligation. If there is a decrease in ROPA, that is favorable on the part of the bank because it's an indication that gamay ra ang mga borrowers ni bank nga wala nakabayad sa ilang mga loans. So therefore here sa atong example, the ROPA account na ay decrease nga 7,500,000 against the industry average. So this is a favorable indication with the operations of the countrywide bank. So meaning to say, gamay ra ang mga borrowers ni countrywide bank ang wala kabayad sa ilahang mga obligation. So kay gamay ra man ang ROPA niya, na i-decrease sa ROPA ni countrywide bank. So ang iyang decrease is again favorable since it is an indication nga gamay ra ang mga kliyente ni countrywide bank ang wala kabayad sa ilahang mga utang. Then we're going to proceed to sales contract receivable. So the sales contract receivable is the account title of the properties acquired by the banks through foreclosure through foreclosure in settlement of the loans of the borrowers who failed to pay their loans. And then such properties are sold on the installment basis. The title of the property will only be transferred to the buyer upon full payment of the selling price. Therefore, the increase in sales contract receivable account indicates more foreclosed assets sold, which is favorable to the bank because funds are no longer stacked or tied up on the non-performing assets like the ROPA. However, if the percentage of sales contract receivable is insignificant to the total unsold foreclosed property and foreclosed properties offered insignificant to the total and foreclosed properties offered sold, the increase in contract receivable becomes unfavorable. So it can be observed in the foregoing example that the foreclosed property sold by the countrywide bank is only 2 million pesos. So we have here in the actual column, the sales contract receivable is 2 million. So again, the foreclosed property sold by the countrywide bank is only 2 million, which is lower than the industry average, since the industry average is 3 million pesos. So this is considered favorable because the sum of the industry average for the properties acquired through foreclosure and the foreclosed properties sold is 13 million pesos. So that is 10 million real properties acquired plus the sales contract receivable nga 3 million. And then if you're going to compare it with the countrywide bank, we have 4,500,000 only. We have 2,500,000 actual real property acquired and plus the 2 million actual sales contract receivable. So the percentage of foreclosed properties sold of countrywide bank is 44.4% against the 23.1% of the industry average. So it appears that the countrywide bank was able to transfer 44.4% of its non-performing assets to its funds available to borrowers, which is better compared to the industry average of only 23.1%. So it is emphasized again that the analysis of financial statements involve gathering of more information about the characteristics of the accounting values and the nature of business before a conclusion is reached. So we'll proceed to answer number 2. So for number 2, we have the liabilities. So we have here the comparative analysis of the liability accounts of countrywide bank against the industry average. So we have deposit liabilities and bills payable. Okay. The industry average data for deposit liabilities is 75 million, and then the actual deposit liabilities of countrywide is 79,850,000 pesos. So there is a difference of 4,850,000. That is equivalent to 6.5% favorable. And then when we also have bills payable, the industry average data is 35 million pesos. And then the actual bills payable of countrywide is 33,300,000. So there is a difference of 1,700,000 decrease, or equivalent to 4.9% favorable. I know this is confusing because usually the increase in liability has an unfavorable effect, but then here the increase in deposit liability is tagged as favorable. So the nature of the operation of the bank will explain this. Okay. So banks basically receive deposits from customer in the form of savings, demand, or time deposits. And then the amount deposited by a customer is a liability to the bank. The bank is obliged to pay the depositor immediately when the depositor demands for his deposit. Therefore, the account title nga bank deposit is shown as part of the liability and the statement of financial possession. So, kanang mo deposit ka sa bangko, kana imong deposit para sa bangko, it's their liability. Kay every time nga ikaw depositor, gusto ka mo withdraw, they're obliged to give you your deposit. So, on the part of the bank, that is part of their liabilities, and the term that they're using is deposit liabilities. So, the bank deposits nga nadawat sa mga banks, the deposits received by the bank increase the cash holdings of the bank, and at the same time, increase the liability of the banks to the depositor by the same amount. But the cash deposits are usually invested by banks on investment with higher interest rate provided by them. So with more cash to invest, banks will be more profitable. Hence, the increase in bank deposits account, which is a liability, is favorable to the business. However, banks are required to maintain a certain percentage of the total deposits received from depositors as statutory reserves for liquidity purposes. So as I mentioned earlier, usually sa ubang business, ang increase in liabilities is unfavorable on the part of the business. But for banks, increase in liabilities. But take note, ang liabilities that I'm talking is all about the deposit liabilities. So the increase of deposit liabilities is favorable in the part of bank. Why? Kay the more or mas daghang deposit liabilities nga maangkon si bank, meaning to say, mas daghan siyang cash nga iyang ika-invest. So, that's the logic there. So, kung daghang cash nga ika-invest si bank, therefore, dako siya og income. That's why we have here the increase in deposit liabilities of Countrywide Bank tagged as favorable. For bills payable, so ang bills payable, this refers to the obligation of the bank arising from rediscounting of borrowers' promissory note to other financial institution. So other than accepting deposits, banks also have another profit-oriented service activity, and that is extending credit to interested borrowers. So ang bangko na sila ipautang. So this credit or loan is evidenced by a promissory note signed by the borrower. So, kung si bangko is ma-short siya sa cash or medyo kulang iyahang cash holdings, si bangko iyang ibaligya ang iyahang mga notes, katong mga PN, mga promissory notes. Pwede ito niya ibaligya to another financial institution or to the other banks. And that is what we call rediscounting. So, the decrease in bills payable indicates lesser notes rediscounted to other banks. So it is a sign of a better cash position and more funds available to borrowers. Hence, the decrease in bills payable account is favorable to the bank. So the decrease in bills payable is again favorable on the part of the bank. Kay kung gamay ra ang bills payable, it's an indication nga wala naglisod sa cash si bangko. Meaning to say, na siya enough cash na pwede niya ika-invest, pwede niya ipautang sa iyang mga borrowers. So, we'll now proceed to number 3. So, this is for the statement of comprehensive income. So, this is the comparative analysis of the statement of comprehensive income of Countrywide Bank against the industry average data. Okay, for interest income on loans, so there is 1,250,000 difference, or equivalent to 6.3%, and that is favorable. We also have interest income on deposits. there's a difference or absolute amount of change in pesos ng 76,000 pesos, which is equivalent to 21.7%, and that is favorable. And for interest expense on deposit liabilities, there is an increase of 150,000 or equivalent to 13.6%. That is favorable. And then for interest expense on borrowed funds, so there is 100,000 decrease or equivalent to 6.3%, and that is favorable. So in normal situation, increase in interest expense is unfavorable. However, on the part of the bank, the interest expense arises because of deposits made by bank depositors. So the increase in interest expense here is because the bank received more deposits from customers. So the increase in interest expense on deposit liabilities is favorable because this is an indication nga daghang deposits nga nadawat si bangko. And as I said earlier, kung daghang deposits nga nadawat si bangko, it's favorable on the part of the bank since naa siya'y daghang cash nga iyang ika-invest or iyang ika-pa utang sa iyang mga borrowers. So that is why it's favorable. Okay, another base nga pwede nato i-compare ang atong actual performance is the primary competitors data. So the horizontal analysis may also conducted to evaluate the operating performance and financial strengths of a business against its primary competitor. The primary concern ani lang niya is that kani nga klase sa financial statement analysis is the primary concern for the analyst in this type of financial statement analysis is to determine any financial competitive advantage of the business against sa iyahang competitor. The analyst seeks to answer this question: what is the financial competitive advantage of the business over its primary rival in terms of profitability, condition, and cash flows? And then the foremost constraint or limitation in this type of analysis is the unavailability of competitors' data. So, usually, di ba, mga negosyo, they do not provide information to the public except those that are required to regularly publish their financial statements in the national dailies. Like, for example, mga bangko. So, they're required to report their income to the BSP. The business should enhance and continually upgrade its business intelligence capabilities and be keen on the moves of its primary competitor. Okay, so we're done. So thank you. I hope you guys have learned something. If you have some questions, kindly comment down in this video aron atong matubag. Okay, thank you.